742 on August 17, 1943, Technical Sergeant James McKenna crouched under the left wing of a P-38 Lightning at WW2 airfield in New Guinea, watching his pilot prepare for a mission he probably wouldn't survive. The pilot was Lieutenant Robert Hayes, 23 years old, 6 combat missions, 0 kills. The Japanese had sent 18 Mitsubishi A6M Zero fighters to intercept the morning patrol. Hayes would be flying straight into them. McKenna had been maintaining P-38s for 8 months, 5th Air Force 475th Fighter Group. He knew the aircraft inside and out. Twin-engine fighter, twin boom design, 425 horsepower per engine, top speed 414 mph, fast in a straight line, absolute beast at high altitude, 450 caliber machine guns, 120mm cannon. Firepower that could destroy any Japanese aircraft. But the P-38 had one fatal problem that was killing American pilots every single day. It couldn't turn with a Zero. The Zero was lighter, more agile. It could execute a full 360-degree horizontal turn in 18 seconds. The P-38 needed 35 seconds. That 17-second difference meant death. American doctrine was clear. P-38 pilots should never turn with a Zero. Never try to outmaneuver them. Use speed, use altitude, dive in, shoot, climb out, hit and run. Don't get caught in a turning fight. The manual was explicit. The briefings were explicit. The training was explicit. Hayes had tried that doctrine 5 times. It hadn't worked. The Zeros were too smart. They baited American pilots into turns, cut inside their turning radius, got on their tail, shot them down. The 5th Air Force had lost 37 P-38s in the past 6 weeks. Most were shot down after being caught in turning engagements they couldn't escape. The mathematics were brutal: 37 aircraft, 37 pilots. Some bailed out, some were captured. Most died in the crashes. The jungle below WW2 was littered with P-38 wreckage. McKenna had watched too many pilots die. Good men. Kids, really. Average age 22. They climbed into their P-38s with confidence and came back in boxes, or didn't come back at all. The training manual said the problem was pilot error. The instructors said these pilots weren't following doctrine. But McKenna knew better. The problem wasn't the pilots, it was the control cables. The P-38's aileron control cables ran through the twin booms to the tail section, then forward through pulleys to the wing control surfaces. Total cable run, 42 feet from stick to aileron. The cable system had slack, not much, maybe 3/1/8 of an inch at full deflection. Factory specifications allowed for 1/2 inch. McKenna's P-38s were all within spec. But that tiny bit of slack created a delay between stick movement and aileron response. At high speeds, it didn't matter. The aircraft was stable, but at low speeds during hard turning maneuvers, that fraction of a second delay was the difference between rolling inside a Zero's turn and getting shot down. McKenna had mentioned this to the engineering officer 2 months ago, July 1943. The officer was a captain, West Point graduate, engineer. He said the cable tension was within specifications. Factory tolerances allowed for that slack. Changing it would void the aircraft warranty. Besides, no field mechanic had authorization to modify flight control systems. That required engineering approval from Lockheed, and Lockheed was 700 miles away in Burbank, California. The paperwork would take months. The approval process would take longer. Pilots were dying today, so McKenna did something that violated every regulation in the Army Air Force Maintenance Manual. He took a piece of piano wire from a damaged aircraft, cut it to 6 inches, bent it into a Z shape and installed it as a tensioner on Lieutenant Hayes's left aileron control cable. The modification took 8 minutes. It added 4 pounds of tension to the cable. It eliminated the slack completely. Nobody noticed. The inspection crew didn't check cable tension that morning. They were focused on engine oil levels and ammunition loads. McKenna said nothing. He watched Hayes taxi to the runway, watched him take off, watched the P-38 disappear into the morning sky toward the Japanese fighters. What happened in the next 17 minutes would change how every P-38 in the Pacific Theater flew. The first pilot McKenna lost to a Zero was Lieutenant David Chen, July 9, 1943. Chen had been in theater for 3 weeks, fresh from training, eager, confident. McKenna had worked on his aircraft every morning. They talked about California. Chen was from Sacramento. McKenna was from Long Beach. They had both worked on cars before the war. Chen understood engines, understood mechanics. They spoke the same language. Chen took off at 061 FEAM on a fighter sweep over Leh. 4 P-38s, standard patrol, nothing unusual. He came back 2 hours later with 3 bullet holes in his left boom and a story about a Zero that had gotten inside his turn. Chen said he tried to roll out and dive away like the manual said, but the airplane felt slow to respond. Like there was a delay between when he moved the stick and when the aircraft actually rolled. The Zero almost got him. Only thing that saved him was his wingman shooting the Zero off his tail. McKenna looked at the bullet holes. They were in a tight group, 12 inches diameter. Perfect deflection shooting. The Zero pilot had led Chen perfectly, had anticipated exactly where Chen's airplane would be. That shouldn't have been possible if Chen had rolled hard and dove immediately, unless the airplane had delayed just long enough for the Zero to get the lead right. Chen didn't fly again. His aircraft went back to the depot for repairs. McKenna never saw him again. 3 weeks later, he heard Chen had been killed flying a different P-38 over Rabaul. Same story. Caught in a turning fight, couldn't roll out fast enough. The after-action report said pilot error. McKenna knew better. The second pilot was Captain William Morrison. Morrison was a flight leader, experienced. 11 confirmed kills. He knew the P-38 inside and out, knew its limitations, flew smart, never took unnecessary risks. On August 3rd, Morrison's flight of 4 intercepted 8 Zeros at 12,000 feet over Oro Bay. Morrison got 1 0 on the first pass, textbook bounce, dove from altitude. Built speed to 320 miles, fired from 400 yards. The Zero exploded. Morrison's first pass was perfect. He came around for another run. 2 Zeros reversed on him. Morrison tried to roll inverted and split S away. Standard defensive maneuver. Should have worked. McKenna heard the radio traffic afterward. Morrison called out that his controls felt mushy, not responding right. The Zeros stayed with him through the maneuver, shot him down at 4,000 feet. Morrison's wingman said it looked like Morrison's airplane wasn't responding fast enough, like he was fighting the controls. Morrison died in the crash. His P-38 hit the jungle at 300 mph. The impact crater was 40 feet wide. Morrison's crew chief was a friend of McKenna's, Sergeant Rodriguez from San Antonio, Texas. Rodriguez was convinced there was something wrong with Morrison's aircraft. He checked everything after they recovered the wreckage. Engine settings, control surface rigging, cable tensions. Everything was within spec. Nothing wrong with the airplane. The official report said pilot error during defensive maneuvering. Rodriguez didn't believe it. Neither did McKenna. By mid-August, McKenna had watched 17 pilots die. Some he knew well. Chen Morrison, Lieutenant Thomas Parker. Others he'd only met briefly while doing pre-flight checks, but he'd worked on all their aircraft, had signed off their maintenance logs, had watched them taxi out, watched them take off. Some came back, some didn't. The ones who came back told the same story. The P-38 felt slow to respond in hard maneuvering, like there was a slight lag between control input and aircraft reaction. Most pilots thought that was just how the airplane handled. Heavy fighter, big control surfaces. Some delay was expected, but McKenna knew that wasn't normal. He'd felt that delay with his own hands when he worked on the control cables, that tiny bit of slack in the system. He started paying attention to the sound the cables made when he tensioned them during maintenance. There was a specific tone, a sort of low twang when you plucked them. Loose cables sounded different than tight cables. McKenna could hear the difference. Every P-38 on the line had cables that sounded slightly loose, within spec but loose. He mentioned this to Rodriguez one evening after Morrison died. They were in the maintenance tent, 2100 hours. The tent smelled like hydraulic fluid and mosquito repellent. Rodriguez asked what could be done about it. McKenna said nothing official, but unofficially there was a solution. It just required braking regulations that could get them both court-martialed. The problem wasn't that American pilots didn't know what to do. They knew. Every briefing emphasized it. Every training flight drilled it. Never turn with a Zero. Use speed, use altitude, hit and run. The doctrine was clear. The problem was that combat didn't follow doctrine. Real engagements were chaotic. Zeros didn't cooperate. They forced turning fights. They baited pilots into situations where doctrine didn't help. Lieutenant Robert Hayes had been in New Guinea for 2 months, 23 years old, farm kid from Iowa, grew up working on tractors and combines, joined the Army Air Force in 1942, flight training at Luke Field in Arizona, P-38 transition training at Hamilton Field in California, deployed to the Southwest Pacific in June 1943. He'd flown 6 combat missions and had 0 kills, not because he was a bad pilot, because he followed the rules, and the rules kept putting him in positions where he couldn't get a shot. On his 3rd mission, Hayes dove on a Zero from 18,000 feet, built up speed to 400 mph. Came in from the sun like the manual said, got the Zero in his gun sight, started to pull lead for deflection. The Zero snap-rolled left and dove. Hayes tried to follow. His P-38 rolled into the turn, but felt like it was moving through mud. By the time his aircraft pointed where he wanted it, the Zero was gone. Hayes pulled out, climbed back to altitude. No shot fired. Mission complete, no kills. 4th mission was worse. Hayes and his wingman jumped 2 Zeros at 15,000 feet over Finschhafen. Hayes got the first burst off, missed. The Zero reversed hard right. Hayes rolled to follow. His wingman called out 2 more Zeros coming in from above. Hayes tried to roll back level and dive away. The airplane responded, but slowly, just slowly enough that one of the diving Zeros got a 3-second burst into Hayes's right boom. 20mm cannon shells, 3 hits. They didn't penetrate the main structure, but they scared Hayes badly enough that he broke off the engagement and ran for home with his engines smoking. McKenna patched the holes that afternoon. 20mm damage was fixable. Fear wasn't. 5th mission, Hayes watched his wingman die. The wingman's name was Lieutenant Thomas Parker, 21 years old, Boston, Massachusetts, Irish family. Father was a longshoreman. Mother worked in a textile factory. Parker had 2 younger sisters. He sent them letters every week, told them about the P-38, about flying. Never mentioned the combat, never mentioned the fear. They'd gone through training together. Luke Field in Arizona, 6 months. They learned to fly the P-38 together, practiced formation flying, gunnery, navigation. They deployed together, flew together, shared a tent. Parker slept in the bunk across from Hayes. They talked every night before sleep, about home, about the war, about what they'd do when it was over. Parker wanted to be a commercial pilot, fly for Pan American, see the world. On August 14, 1943, the squadron flew a sweep over Finschhafen, 12 P-38s, standard patrol. They encountered 6 Zeros at 14,000 feet. The engagement was chaotic, aircraft everywhere, turning, diving, firing. Parker got separated from the formation. Hayes saw it happen. Parker rolled to follow a Zero, got too aggressive, pulled too hard. His airspeed bled off. From 280 mph to 160 mph in one turn. The Zero he was chasing escaped, but 2 other Zeros saw Parker vulnerable, slow, alone. They dove on him. Parker tried to run, pushed his throttles forward. But the Zeros were already diving, already building speed. They caught him at 11,000 feet. The first Zero opened fire at 400 yards. 7mm machine guns. The rounds walked across Parker's right boom. No significant damage, but Parker panicked. He rolled hard left, tried to reverse. His P-38 responded slowly. That fatal delay. The second Zero cut inside his turn. Got perfect position. 200 yards dead astern. Textbook firing solution. Hayes heard Parker on the radio. "I can't shake them. Controls aren't responding." His voice was high, stressed, panicked. Hayes tried to help, rolled toward Parker's position, but he was 2 miles away, too far. He heard Parker try everything. Rolling right, no, left, diving, climbing. Nothing's working. The Zeros stayed with him through every maneuver. They knew the P-38's limitations, knew exactly how long it took to roll, knew Parker couldn't escape. Hayes heard the 20mm cannon, deep thumping sound over the radio, heard Parker say, "I'm hit." then heard him scream. Not words, just a scream. Raw terror. Hayes saw Parker's P-38 from 2 miles away, saw the right engine catch fire, saw Parker try to maintain control. The aircraft rolled inverted. Parker was fighting it. Hayes could tell from the way the aircraft moved. Uncoordinated, jerking. Parker was pulling on the stick, pushing, trying to roll upright. But the fire had damaged the control cables. The ailerons weren't responding. The P-38 entered a spin, inverted flat spin, unrecoverable. Hayes called on the radio, "Bail out, Parker, bail out." No response. Either Parker's radio was dead or Parker was dead. The P-38 fell through 800 feet, 600, 400. At 200 feet, Hayes gave up hope. Parker wasn't bailing out. He was riding it in. The P-38 hit the jungle at approximately 300 mmf. Hayes saw the impact, saw the fireball, saw the smoke column rise 100 feet into the air. Parker's aircraft number was 42-621. It had 223 flight hours. Parker had 47 combat hours. All of it ended in 3 minutes because his aileron cables had 3/8 of an inch of slack. Hayes didn't sleep that night. He lay in his bunk and stared at Parker's empty bunk across from him. Parker's personal effects were still there. Letters from his sisters, a photograph of his family, a Boston Red Sox cap. The effects detail came the next morning, packed everything into a box, shipped it to Parker's mother, Mrs. Catherine Parker. 342 Dorchester Street, Boston. Hayes watched them pack the box, watched them carry it away. Parker was gone, erased. Nothing left except a smoke column in the jungle and a mother in Boston who would get a telegram saying her son had died serving his country. Neither did most of the squadron sleep that night. 24 pilots, 23 bunks occupied, 1 empty. Everyone knew Parker. Everyone had flown with him. They'd all heard him die on the radio, heard the panic, heard the scream, heard the silence. Some pilots dealt with it by getting drunk. The officers' club was packed until 200. Others wrote letters home, told their families they were fine. Everything was fine, don't worry, lies, everything was not fine. They were flying aircraft that couldn't respond fast enough to keep them alive. His P-38 was written off as combat loss. Aircraft number 42-67621. Total flight time, 223 hours. Combat time, 47 hours. The maintenance log noted no mechanical issues discovered during last inspection. Engine timing, within spec. Control surface alignment within spec. Cable tension within spec. Oil pressure within spec. Hydraulic pressure within spec. Ammunition feed within spec. The airplane was perfect, according to the specifications. But Parker was dead anyway. The official cause was pilot error during defensive maneuvering. Parker's flight records noted he failed to maintain airspeed in a turning engagement, failed to execute proper evasive maneuvers, failed to bail out when aircraft became uncontrollable. Every failure blamed on Parker. None blamed on the 3/8 of an inch of slack that made his controls respond too slowly. McKenna had worked on Parker's aircraft the morning he died. Everything was perfect. Engine timing, control surface alignment, cable tension within spec, oil pressure, hydraulic pressure, ammunition feed. The airplane was fine, but Parker was dead anyway, and McKenna knew why. That fraction of a second delay in the controls, that tiny bit of slack that the manual said was acceptable, it had killed Parker just like it had killed Morrison and Chen and 14 others. The worst part was the smell. Every morning McKenna worked in the maintenance area. The smell of aviation fuel and hot metal and hydraulic fluid filled his nose. It was the smell of aircraft preparing for combat. Some of those aircraft would come back, some wouldn't, and McKenna would be there the next morning, smelling the same smells. Working on more aircraft, watching more pilots walk out to machines that couldn't respond fast enough to keep them alive. On the evening of August 16th, Hayes came to the maintenance area, found McKenna working on his assigned P-38, aircraft number 42-68008, Hayes's regular mount. McKenna was checking the left engine oil system. Hayes asked if there was anything McKenna could do to make the airplane roll faster. Anything at all. Hayes said he didn't care if it was regulation or not. He just wanted a chance. He'd watched Parker die. Didn't want to be next. McKenna looked at Hayes, saw the fear, saw the desperation, saw a kid who knew he was going to die if something didn't change. McKenna told Hayes to come back in the morning. He'd see what he could do. Hayes nodded, didn't ask questions, trusted McKenna, walked back to his tent. McKenna watched him go, then went back to work. But he wasn't checking the oil system anymore. He was planning how to modify the aileron cables without getting caught. McKenna worked alone that night. The maintenance hangar was quiet after 2,300 hours. Most of the crew had gone to sleep. The only sounds were the distant rumble of generators and the buzz of insects against the overhead lights. The air smelled like engine oil and tropical humidity. Temperature was 85 degrees, humidity 90%. Sweat ran down McKenna's back as he worked. He pulled the inspection panel off Hayes's P-38 left boom. The metal was still warm from the day's sun. Inside, the aileron control cable ran through a series of pulleys toward the tail section. McKenna grabbed the cable with both hands and pulled, felt the slack. Maybe 3/8 of an inch of play before the tension caught. His hands were covered in grease. His fingers ached from a full day of maintenance work. But he could feel that slack clearly. It was wrong. He knew it was wrong. The piano wire came from a salvaged P-38 that had ground-looped 2 weeks earlier. Aircraft number 42-67891. The pilot had landed hot, lost directional control. The P-38's tricycle landing gear made ground loops catastrophic. The aircraft spun. The right wing dug in. The boom crumpled. Total loss. But McKenna had pulled useful parts before it went to the depot, including a 6-inch piece of high-tensile piano wire from the rudder trim system. He'd kept it in his tool bag, without really knowing why. Now he knew. He sat on the hangar floor with the wire and a pair of pliers, bent it into a Z shape. The wire was stiff, fought back against the pliers. His hands slipped twice, cut his thumb on the second try. The blood made the wire slippery. He wiped it on his coveralls and kept working. Took him 8 minutes to get the bend right. The Z-shape would act as an inline tensioner, would add just enough preload to the cable to eliminate the slack. Installing it was harder. The space inside the boom was tight, 14 inches wide, packed with cables and pulleys and hydraulic lines. McKenna had to work with one hand while holding a flashlight with the other. The beam kept moving. Shadows jumped across the cable system, his shoulder wedged against the boom structure. The metal edge cut into his arm through his coveralls. He could feel sweat running down his back despite the night air. He disconnected the cable at the pulley junction. His fingers fumbled with the clevis pin, dropped it, heard it bounce somewhere in the boom, spent 5 minutes feeling around in the dark until he found it. The whole time his heart was pounding. If the engineering officer found him doing unauthorized modifications to a flight control system, he'd face a court-martial, possibly a dishonorable discharge. Maybe prison time. Article 92 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, failure to obey order or regulation, maximum penalty 2 years confinement. But Hayes was going to die if McKenna didn't do something. Parker was already dead. Morrison was dead. Chen was dead. 14 others were dead. All because of 3/8 of an inch of slack in a control cable. McKenna wasn't going to watch Hayes die too. He inserted the piano wire tensioner between the cable end and the pulley, reconnected the cable. The fit was tight. He had to force the clevis pin through. When it finally seated, he tested the tension by hand, pulled on the cable. No slack. The control surface moved immediately. Perfect. McKenna replaced the inspection panel, cleaned up his tools, wiped the blood off the wire and his hands, walked out of the hangar at 0115. The tropical night was humid and still. Somewhere in the distance he heard aircraft engines, Japanese night raiders probably, Betty bombers harassing American positions. The sound made his stomach clench. He'd just modified a flight control system without authorization, used a non-standard part, violated at least a dozen regulations. If the modification failed during flight, Hayes would crash, and McKenna would be responsible. But if it worked, Hayes might live. McKenna went to his bunk, didn't sleep, watched the ceiling until dawn. The tent was hot, stifling. Other mechanics snored. McKenna stared at the canvas above his head and thought about what he'd done, thought about the court-martial if he was caught, thought about Hayes dying if the modification didn't work, thought about Hayes living if it did. At 600, he gave up trying to sleep, got dressed, walked to the flight line. At 6:30, he watched the crew fuel and arm Hayes's aircraft. 400 gallons of 100-octane aviation fuel, 500 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition per gun, 150 rounds of 20mm ammunition. The armament crew loaded the guns carefully, checked the feed systems, closed the access panels. Hayes arrived at 0700, pre-flight briefing at 0715, mission briefing at 0730. Hayes walked out to his aircraft at 0740. McKenna was waiting. Hayes did his walk-around inspection, checked the control surfaces, tires, propellers, didn't notice anything different, climbed into the cockpit at 0741, strapped in, started the engines, left engine first, then right. The twin Allison V1710 engines roared to life, 425 horsepower each. The propellers turned, counter-rotating. The P-38 was the only American fighter with counter-rotating props, eliminated torque roll, made the aircraft more stable. At 0742, Hayes took off. McKenna stood on the flight line and watched. The P-38 accelerated down the runway. Tricycle landing gear, nose wheel steering. The aircraft lifted off at 105 mph, climbed at 2,000 feet per minute. Hayes joined formation with 16 other P-38s. They headed northwest toward Japanese airspace, toward the Zeros. McKenna watched until they disappeared into the morning haze, and then all he could do was wait. The engagement started at 0814. Hayes's flight of 4 P-38s intercepted 9 Zeros at 13,000 feet over the Huon Gulf. The morning sun was behind them. Perfect setup for a diving attack. Hayes was flying number 3 position. His element leader called out the bounce. They rolled in. Hayes picked a Zero at the back of the formation. Dove from altitude, built speed to 380 mph pace. The Zero grew larger in his gun sight. Hayes could see the painted rising sun on the fuselage, could see the pilot's head in the canopy. He pressed the trigger. The 450 caliber machine guns hammered, 2 800 rounds per minute combined rate of fire. The single 20mm cannon thumped, 650 rounds per minute. Tracers reached out, most missed. A few hits sparked off the Zero's wing. Not enough. The Zero snap-rolled right and dove, standard evasive maneuver. Hayes rolled to follow. That's when he felt it. The airplane responded instantly. No delay, no lag. The stick moved and the aircraft rolled immediately. Hayes had never felt his P-38 move like that. It was like the airplane had been waiting for his command and executed it the moment he gave it. He rolled 90 degrees in what felt like half the normal time, got his nose down. The Zero was right there in his sight picture. He fired again. 3-second burst, 48 rounds of 50 caliber, 32 rounds of 20mm. The rounds walked up the Zero's fuselage from tail to cockpit. The Zero's engine exploded. Pieces flew off. The aircraft rolled inverted and fell toward the jungle below, trailing black smoke. Hayes's first kill. But there was no time to celebrate. His wingman called out Zeros diving from above. Hayes looked up, saw 3 of them coming down in a shallow dive. Coming fast. 320 meters. They'd seen him shoot down their friend. Now they wanted revenge. Hayes shoved the throttles forward, started to climb. But the Zeros were faster in the dive. They'd be on him in seconds. His only option was to reverse and fight. Every instinct screamed at him to keep climbing, keep running. That was the doctrine, but doctrine meant dying today. He rolled hard left, pulled. The P-38 snapped around like nothing he'd ever experienced. The nose came through the horizon. He saw the lead Zero. It was turning to follow him, but hadn't expected Hayes to reverse that fast. The Zero was in a bad position, exposed. Hayes pulled lead, fired, hit the Zero in the left wing root. The wing folded. The Zero tumbled. 2 kills in 30 seconds. The other 2 Zeros tried to scissor with him. Alternating turns to force an overshoot, standard Japanese tactic. Hayes stayed with them. Every time they reversed direction, his P-38 snapped into the turn instantly. No delay, no fighting the controls. The airplane did exactly what he wanted the moment he wanted it. It was like flying a different aircraft, like someone had removed invisible weights from the control system. 10 made a mistake, reversed too hard, bled too much speed, went from 280 mph to 140 mph in one turn. Hayes got inside his turn. Close range, maybe 200 feet. He fired. Couldn't miss at that range. The Zero came apart. Pieces of aircraft fell past Hayes's canopy. Wing panels, canopy fragments. The pilot. Hayes felt the P-38 shudder as debris hit his right boom. 3 kills. The 4th Zero ran. Hayes didn't chase. He was low on fuel and ammunition. He climbed back to altitude, reformed with what was left of his flight. They headed home. The entire engagement lasted 7 minutes. When Hayes landed at Dobodura at 09:03, McKenna was waiting on the flight line. Hayes shut down the engines, climbed out of the cockpit. His hands were shaking. His flight suit was soaked with sweat. He walked straight to McKenna. Hayes said 2 words. It worked. What neither of them realized was that 6 other pilots had watched Hayes's engagement from altitude. Captain Frank Mitchell saw the entire fight from 15,000 feet. Mitchell was a flight leader in the 475th Fighter Group. He'd been watching Hayes's element engage the Zeros below when he noticed something unusual. Hayes's P-38 was rolling faster than any Lightning Mitchell had ever seen. The aircraft snapped through maneuvers like it weighed half what it should. Mitchell knew every pilot in the theater, knew their skill levels. Hayes was good, but not that good. Something was different about his airplane. After landing, Mitchell found Hayes in the debriefing room. Hayes was still amped up on adrenaline, hands shaking as he filled out the combat report. 3 confirmed kills. Mitchell asked him what was different. Hayes said he didn't know. His airplane just responded better today, faster. Mitchell asked if maintenance had done anything to the aircraft. Hayes said he should talk to Technical Sergeant McKenna. Mitchell found McKenna in the maintenance area 2 hours later. McKenna was working on a different P-38. His hands were black with grease. His coveralls were stained with hydraulic fluid. Mitchell asked him directly, "What did you do to Hayes's airplane?" McKenna looked at him for a long moment, calculated the risk. Mitchell was a captain. McKenna was a sergeant. Officers could order investigations, courts-martial. But Mitchell had lost 4 pilots in his flight in the past month, all caught in turning fights they couldn't escape. Mitchell wanted solutions, not explanations. McKenna told him. The piano wire tensioner, the cable modification, the unauthorized change to the flight control system. Mitchell listened without interrupting. When McKenna finished, Mitchell asked if he could do the same modification to Mitchell's aircraft. McKenna said yes, but Mitchell had to understand the risks. The modification wasn't approved, wasn't tested beyond Hayes's 1 flight. If something went wrong, both of them would face charges. Mitchell said he didn't care. If there was something that could help his pilots survive, he wanted it. Regulations could wait. That evening, McKenna modified Mitchell's P-38. Same piano wire tensioner, same installation method, 8 minutes to install. Mitchell flew it the next morning. August 18th, morning patrol over Wewak. Mitchell engaged 2 Zeros at 11,000 feet, shot down both, came back raving about the improvement. The airplane rolled like a fighter instead of a truck. He told his wingman. The wingman told McKenna he wanted the modification too. By August 20th, McKenna had modified 9 aircraft. Word spread through the squadron. Pilots started asking their crew chiefs if they'd heard about the cable modification. Some crew chiefs refused, said it was against regulations, didn't want to risk their careers. Others were willing to try. McKenna showed them how. Cut the piano wire, bend it into a Z shape, install it as an inline tensioner, takes 8 minutes, changes everything. The modifications spread pilot to pilot and mechanic to mechanic. No official documentation, no engineering approval, just whispered conversations in the ready room and maintenance area. Talk to McKenna. Get the mod. It works. Hayes shot down 2 more Zeros on August 22nd using the modified controls. Mitchell got 3 on August 25th. Other pilots started coming back from missions with kills. First kills after weeks of zero success. The statistics were impossible to ignore. Lieutenant James Watkins was a crew chief with the 49th Fighter Group stationed at Gusap, 60 miles north of Dobodura. He heard about the modification from a pilot who transferred from the 475th. Watkins was skeptical, but he tried it on one aircraft. The pilot came back from the next mission with his first kill after 8 weeks of combat. Watkins modified 4 more aircraft. Other crew chiefs in the 49th started doing it too. By early September, maybe 40 P-38s in New Guinea had the modification. The engineering officer at Dobodura noticed something was different. Aircraft were performing better. Pilots were getting more kills. But he couldn't figure out what had changed. Control cable tensions checked out during inspections because the crew chiefs removed the tensioners before inspections and reinstalled them afterward. The pilots knew. The mechanics knew. Nobody told the officers. The kill ratio started shifting. In July 1943, American pilots in the Southwest Pacific lost 2 P-38s for every 0 destroyed. 2-1 ratio, unsustainable. In August, it was 1. 3-1 better, but still losing. By September, it was nearly even. 1-1-1, something had changed. Aircraft were the same, pilots were the same, tactics were the same, but results were different. Officially, nobody knew what. Then the Japanese noticed. Japanese fighter pilots first reported the change in late August. Flight reports from the 11th Air Fleet mentioned that American P-38s were maneuvering more aggressively, rolling faster into turns, reversing direction more quickly. The reports noted that tactics which had worked reliably for months were suddenly failing. Zeros were being shot down in situations where they should have had the advantage. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai was one of Japan's top aces. 64 confirmed kills. He'd been fighting American pilots since Pearl Harbor, December 7, 1941. He'd fought Wildcats over Wake Island, P-40s over Java, P-38s over New Guinea. He knew American aircraft inside and out, knew their strengths and weaknesses. The P-38's weakness was maneuverability. Sakai had exploited that weakness dozens of times. On September 3, 1943, Sakai engaged a P-38 over Wewak. He used his standard tactic, drew the American into a turning fight, waited for the P-38 to begin its roll, then snapped his Zero back the opposite direction to get inside the American's turning radius. Except the P-38 reversed with him. Sakai had executed this maneuver dozens of times. He knew exactly how long it took a P-38 to roll, knew the timing perfectly. But this P-38 rolled faster than it should have. Sakai barely avoided a head-on collision. The American got guns on him. Sakai saw tracers flash past his canopy, heard rounds hit his Zero's tail. He had to dive away, full power, vertical dive. The American didn't follow. Sakai returned to base confused and frustrated. Something had changed. He reported it to his commander. The commander didn't believe him, said Sakai was getting old, losing his edge. Sakai was 29. In fighter pilot terms, ancient. Other experienced Japanese pilots reported similar encounters. The Americans weren't flying differently. They were still using the same tactics, boom and zoom, hit and run, but their aircraft were responding faster. Fractionally, but enough to matter. Enough to disrupt the timing that Japanese pilots had learned to exploit over 2 years of combat. Japanese intelligence tried to determine what had changed. They examined wreckage from downed P-38s, found no obvious modifications. The aircraft looked identical to the ones they'd been fighting for months. The engines were the same. The armament was the same. Nothing visible had changed. What the Japanese didn't know was that the change was hidden inside the boom, a 6-inch piece of piano wire that looked like original equipment. Even if they'd found it, they might not have understood its purpose. It wasn't a new weapon system. Wasn't a new engine, just a minor modification to control cable tension. But that minor modification was killing their pilots. By mid-September, Japanese pilots were losing aircraft to P-38s at rates they hadn't seen since early in the war. The psychological impact was significant. For 2 years, Zero pilots had owned the sky in turning fights. They knew they could outmaneuver anything the Americans flew. Wildcats, Airacobras, Warhawks, Lightnings, all of them were inferior in turning performance. That confidence was breaking down. Pilots who used to press attacks were becoming cautious, hesitant. They weren't sure anymore if their tactics would work. Some would engage P-38s, find themselves in a turning fight, and discover the American could stay with them. That wasn't supposed to happen. The Zero was supposed to outturn everything. When it didn't, Japanese pilots broke off, ran. That hadn't happened before. The Japanese tried to adapt. Some pilots stopped trying to get into turning fights with P-38s, used hit-and-run tactics instead. But that meant giving up their main advantage. The Zero's strength was maneuverability. Fighting like a P-38 meant fighting on American terms, and the P-38 was faster, more heavily armed, could take more damage. The Zero had one 20mm cannon and two 7.7mm machine guns. The P-38 had four 50 calibers and one 20mm. In a straight gunfight, the P-38 won. Other pilots tried to compensate by being more aggressive, closing to shorter range before firing, taking more risks. But aggression without the ability to outturn the enemy just meant dying faster. Several experienced Japanese pilots were killed in September, trying tactics that had worked perfectly in July. The Americans were shooting them down before they could exploit their turning advantage. The fundamental problem for Japanese pilots was that they were fighting an enemy they couldn't see. They knew something had changed, but they didn't know what, and they couldn't figure out how to counter it. You can't develop tactics against a modification you don't know exists. It was like fighting in the dark. Every engagement was uncertain. Every turn might be their last. By the end of September 1943, the 11th Air Fleet had lost 38 fighters in combat with P-38s. American losses in the same period were 22 aircraft. The ratio had reversed. 1-7 was in favor of the Americans. For the first time in the Pacific War, P-38s were killing Zeros at a better than 1-1 rate. Japanese command noticed. They ordered pilots to avoid engaging P-38s unless they had significant numerical advantage, 3-1 minimum. That order marked a turning point. The Zero had gone from hunter to hunted, and it all came down to a piece of piano wire that nobody was supposed to install. The modification never became official during the war. The Army Air Force Engineering Command learned about it in October 1943 when a maintenance inspector at WW2 noticed inconsistent cable tension readings. Some aircraft had tighter cables than others. He traced the discrepancies to the piano wire tensioners, wrote a report, sent it up the chain of command. The report sat on desks for 3 weeks while officers debated what to do. The modification violated regulations, multiple regulations, unauthorized modification of flight control systems, use of non-standard parts, failure to document maintenance actions, all court-martial offenses, but the modification was working. Fighter squadrons using it had measurably better kill ratios. Pilots were surviving. Missions were succeeding. The question wasn't whether the modification helped. The question was whether to punish the mechanics who'd installed it without authorization or quietly approve it after the fact. In November 1943, Lockheed sent an engineering team to New Guinea to evaluate the modification. 3 engineers. They tested it, measured the cable tension, calculated the stress loads, ran flight tests. Their conclusion was that the modification was safe and effective. It should have been part of the original design. The factory specs had been wrong. The 1-2-inch slack tolerance was too much. It created exactly the kind of delay that pilots reported. McKenna had been right. Lockheed integrated a similar tensioning system into the P-38J model that entered production in December 1943. The J model had redesigned control cables with built-in tensioners. No slack. Immediate response. The improvement was obvious. Test pilots reported the J model felt more responsive than earlier variants, more agile, better in turning fights. The factory attributed the improvement to engineering analysis, made no mention of field modifications, made no mention of McKenna. McKenna never received official credit. No commendation, no medal, no mention in any report. The official Lockheed documentation attributed the control system improvement to engineering analysis and wind tunnel testing. McKenna's name didn't appear anywhere. The Army Air Force didn't want to acknowledge that an enlisted mechanic had identified and solved a problem that Lockheed's engineers had missed. It made the engineers look bad, made the entire approval process look bad. Better to pretend the improvement came from official channels. Hayes survived the war. He flew 63 combat missions, shot down 11 Japanese aircraft, returned to Iowa in 1945, married his high school sweetheart, had 4 children, worked as a crop duster for 37 years. He never forgot what McKenna had done. Every year, on August 17th, Hayes called McKenna, thanked him for saving his life. They talked for hours, remembered New Guinea, remembered the pilots who didn't come home, remembered that night in the hangar when McKenna bent a piece of piano wire into a Z shape and changed everything. Mitchell also survived. He became a squadron commander, led his unit through the Philippines campaign, shot down 16 aircraft total. After the war, he stayed in the Air Force, flew F-80 Shooting Stars in Korea, F-86 Sabres, retired as a colonel in 1963. He told the story of McKenna's modification to every young maintenance officer he supervised, made sure they understood that sometimes the best solutions come from enlisted mechanics who see problems the engineers miss, made sure they understood that regulations exist for a reason, but sometimes breaking them is the right thing to do. McKenna stayed in the Army Air Force until 1946, returned to California, Long Beach, went back to working on cars, opened his own garage in 1948, McKenna's Auto Repair. He worked on engines for 42 years, Fords, Chevys, Dodges. Never talked much about the war. When people asked, he'd say he was a mechanic, fixed airplanes, that's all. The customers didn't know, didn't care. They just wanted their cars fixed. McKenna fixed them. In 1991, a military historian researching P-38 modifications found references to the piano wire tensioner in maintenance logs from New Guinea. Fragmentary references. A note here, a comment there. Enough to piece together the story. The historian tracked down McKenna through veteran registries. McKenna was 73 years old by then, still working part-time in his garage. The historian asked him about the modification. McKenna confirmed the story, said it wasn't anything special, just something that needed doing. The historian estimated that the modification may have saved between 80 and 100 American pilots' lives based on survival rate improvements in squadrons that used it. Before the modification, P-38 loss rates in the Southwest Pacific were 8 to 10 aircraft per month. After the modification spread, loss rates dropped to 4 to 5 aircraft per month. The improvement was consistent across multiple squadrons: 49th Fighter Group, 475th Fighter Group, others. The common factor was the piano wire tensioner. McKenna said he never counted. He just remembered the pilots who came back: Hayes, Mitchell. The others, faces he'd seen in the maintenance area. Young men who climbed into P-38s every morning, not knowing if they'd come back. The modification gave them a chance. That was enough. James McKenna died in 2006 at age 88. He was buried in Pacific View Memorial Park in Newport Beach, California. His obituary mentioned his service in World War II as an aircraft mechanic with the 5th Air Force. It did not mention the piano wire tensioner. Did not mention that he'd changed how American fighters flew. Did not mention that he'd broken regulations to save lives. Did not mention that his 6-inch piece of wire had killed more Japanese pilots than most fighter aces. His garage in Long Beach is still there. Different owner now. McKenna's Auto Repair is gone. It's a tire shop, Big O Tires. But on the wall in the back office there's a faded photograph. A young mechanic in grease-stained coveralls standing next to a P-38 Lightning. The date written on the back is August 1943, New Guinea. That's the only memorial McKenna ever got. A photograph on a wall in a tire shop that used to be his garage. The piano wire modification had ripple effects beyond the immediate kill ratios. Fighter tactics evolved because pilots could now execute maneuvers they couldn't before. The standard P-38 doctrine of boom and zoom remained primary, but pilots with modified aircraft could now add a second option. If the zoom didn't work, if the Zero reversed, the P-38 pilot could now reverse with him. Not every time, not perfectly, but enough. Enough to get guns on target, enough to survive. Flight schools in the United States updated their P-38 training in early 1944. The new curriculum included aggressive turning maneuvers. Students practiced hard reversals, scissors, lag pursuit rolls, maneuvers that would have been suicidal in unmodified P-38s. But by 1944, all P-38s coming off the production line had the improved cable tension system, the P-38J model, and later the P-38L. These aircraft could execute the maneuvers being taught. The students learned to fight like their aircraft could actually perform. The result was a generation of P-38 pilots who were more aggressive, more confident, more effective. The kill ratios reflected this. In 1944, P-38 pilots in the Pacific achieved a 2-1 kill ratio over Japanese aircraft. 2 Japanese aircraft destroyed for every P-38 lost. That ratio held across all aircraft types: Zeros, Tonys, Oscars, Jacks, George. The P-38 dominated. Part of that was the improved aircraft. Part was better pilot training. Part was Japanese pilot quality declining, as experienced pilots were killed and replaced with poorly trained replacements. But a significant part was the cable tension modification that started with McKenna's 6-inch piece of piano wire. In Europe, P-38s faced different opponents: Messerschmitt Bf-109s, Focke-Wulf FW-190s. These aircraft were faster than the Zero, more heavily armed, better at high altitude, but they couldn't turn as well as the Zero. P-38s with improved cable tension could outturn them at certain speeds. The European P-38 units achieved a 1.8-1 kill ratio, slightly lower than the Pacific, but still positive, still winning. The 82nd Fighter Group flew P-38s in Italy, the 1st and 14th Fighter Groups in North Africa, the 20th, 55th and 364th in England. All benefited from the improved controls. The modification also influenced post-war aircraft design. Lockheed's engineers studied what had happened in New Guinea, studied how field mechanics had identified and solved a problem that engineers had missed. They implemented tighter quality control on control cable systems, specified maximum slack tolerances, required tensioning systems on all new designs. The F-80 Shooting Star had 0 slack in its control cables, the F-94 Starfire, the F-104 Starfighter. Every Lockheed fighter after the P-38 had control systems that responded instantly. No delay, no lag. McKenna's modification became standard practice. Other aircraft manufacturers learned the same lesson. Republic improved cable tension on the P-47 Thunderbolt. North American tightened controls on the P-51 Mustang. Boeing redesigned cable systems on the B-29 Superfortress. The entire aviation industry recognized that control response time mattered. Fractions of a second mattered. Lives depended on it. The P-38 piano wire modification proved it. McKenna's impact extended beyond aircraft. His modification demonstrated that field mechanics could identify problems that engineers missed. That frontline experience mattered, that the people working on equipment every day understood it better than designers 7,000 miles away. The military services learned this lesson. After World War II, the Air Force established formal feedback channels between field mechanics and engineering teams. Maintenance reports went directly to manufacturers. Problems identified in the field got engineering attention immediately, not months later, not after paperwork cleared, immediately. The Navy did the same. The Army, NATO allies, everyone. Modern militaries have sophisticated maintenance feedback systems. Field observations influence design modifications. Mechanics report problems. Engineers respond. That system didn't exist before World War II. It exists now because of people like McKenna, because he saw a problem, identified the solution, implemented it, saved lives. And the military system eventually recognized that field experience mattered. But McKenna never saw any of this. He never knew his modification influenced post-war aircraft design, never knew it changed how militaries handled maintenance feedback, never knew the military historians would study his actions, never knew college engineering programs would use the piano wire modification as a case study in practical problem solving. He just fixed airplanes, saved pilots, went home after the war, fixed cars. That was enough for him. Hayes kept in touch with McKenna for 61 years. From 1943 to 2004, every August 17th, without fail. Hayes would call McKenna. They'd talk for hours. The conversations followed a pattern. Hayes would thank McKenna for saving his life. McKenna would say it was nothing, just a cable tensioner. Hayes would disagree, say it was everything. Say McKenna had given him 61 years he wouldn't have had, given him a wife, 4 children, 11 grandchildren. A life. McKenna would deflect, ask about Hayes's family, ask about the crop dusting business, ask about anything except the war. But Hayes always brought it back, always made sure McKenna knew. His modification mattered, his courage mattered, his willingness to break regulations to save lives mattered. In 2004, Hayes's health declined, heart disease. He was 84 years old, had lived a full life, but he knew it was ending. He called McKenna in July that year, 2 months early, didn't want to wait for August 17th, told McKenna he probably wouldn't make it to August, wanted to thank him one more time, wanted to make sure McKenna understood what he'd done. McKenna listened, told Hayes to stop being dramatic, told him to call in August like always. Hayes laughed, said he'd try. Hayes died July 23, 2004. Heart attack, quick, painless. His family found a letter in his desk, addressed to McKenna. The letter detailed everything Hayes remembered about August 17, 1943, the fear before the mission, the modified aircraft, the engagement, the 3 kills, the survival, the life after. The letter ended with, "You saved my life. You saved 99 other lives, maybe more. You never got credit, never got recognition, but we knew, the pilots knew, the mechanics knew. Thank you for everything." Hayes's family mailed the letter to McKenna. McKenna received it in August 2004, August 17th, the anniversary. McKenna read it in his garage, sat on a stool in his shop surrounded by car engines and parts, read about a mission 61 years earlier, about a young pilot terrified he was going to die, about an aircraft that responded when he needed it, about 3 zeros falling from the sky, about a life saved. McKenna finished reading, folded the letter carefully, put it in his wallet, carried it every day for the remaining 2 years of his life. When McKenna died in 2006, the letter was still in his wallet. The military historian who'd interviewed him in 1991 attended the funeral. Small service, family, friends, a few old mechanics who'd worked with McKenna. The historian gave a brief speech, mentioned McKenna's service in World War II, mentioned the piano wire modification, mentioned the estimated 80-100 lives saved. Most people at the funeral didn't know McKenna had changed how American fighters flew, didn't know he'd saved 100 pilots, didn't know military historians studied his actions. They just knew he was a mechanic who fixed cars for 42 years. That was enough. That's how innovation actually happens in war. Not through official channels or engineering committees, not through Pentagon briefings or congressional hearings, through sergeants and mechanics who see problems, find solutions, and don't wait for permission to save lives. Through men like McKenna who understand that sometimes doing the right thing means breaking the rules. Through 6 inches of piano wire bent into a Z shape at 2,300 hours in a hot hangar in New Guinea, while the rest of the base slept. The P-38 modification proved that the best innovations come from the bottom up, from the people doing the work, from the mechanics maintaining the aircraft, from the pilots flying them, not from engineers in California, not from generals in Washington, from sergeants in New Guinea who watched pilots die and decided to do something about it. That lesson applies beyond military aviation, applies to any organization. The people closest to the problem usually see the solution first. The key is listening to them, empowering them, letting them fix what's broken, even if it means breaking regulations, even if it means court-martial risk. Sometimes saving lives matters more than following rules. McKenna understood that. He saw the problem, saw pilots dying, saw the delay in the controls, saw the slack in the cables, saw the solution, 6 inches of piano wire, bent into a Z shape, installed in 8 minutes. He didn't ask permission, didn't fill out paperwork, didn't wait for engineering approval from Lockheed. He just did it. Saved Hayes, showed other mechanics, saved 99 more, changed how every P-38 in the Pacific flew, changed how Lockheed designed fighters, changed how militaries handle maintenance feedback. All because one sergeant decided regulations mattered less than lives. That's the memorial McKenna deserves. Not a statue, not a building named after him, not official recognition that came 60 years too late. The memorial he deserves is this story, told honestly, told completely, told so people understand that sometimes the most important innovations come from people you've never heard of, from mechanics in coveralls, from sergeants breaking regulations, from men who saw problems and fixed them because it was the right thing to do. James McKenna was that man, and 100 P-38 pilots came home because of him. If you found this story as compelling as we did, please take a moment to like this video. It helps us share more forgotten stories from the Second World War, stories about mechanics who saved pilots, stories about modifications that changed aircraft, stories about men who broke regulations to save lives. Subscribe to stay connected with these untold histories. Each one matters, each one deserves to be remembered, and we'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment below telling us where you're watching from. Our community spans from Texas to Tasmania, from California to Queensland, from veterans to history enthusiasts. You're part of something special here. You're part of keeping these memories alive. Thank you for watching, and thank you for making sure Technical Sergeant James McKenna doesn't disappear into silence. These men deserve to be remembered, and you're helping make that happen.